everyone, and welcome to our second annual My Sister's Keeper Week. MSK Week, is focused on young Black women making their health a priority. My name is Janae Epps, and I am the director of My Sister's Keeper and Positive Period for the Black Women's Health Imperative. Today, for the Well Conversation, I will be in conversation with Kiana Rose, therapist and blogger, to discuss mental and emotional health. So now I would like to introduce to you all Key. Hi,
Hi.
Key. Thank you for
Hi.
joining me today.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So let's jump right on in. So, can you tell us about who you are and what you do?
Of course. So, everyone, my name is Kiana Rose. I am a recent graduate of North Carolina A&T. I graduated about a year ago. I just started in the field as a therapist, as an LPCA, and I'm also a blogger. I'm very passionate about mental health, so I'm super excited to be here and to have this conversation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Okay. So, what has your journey been like as a therapist? I know that you're just starting out,
Mhm.
especially during this ongoing pandemic.
For sure. It's been tough. It's been definitely tough. When the pandemic first started, I was in my second year. And so that kind of disrupted some things. It disrupted, like, the way that I was doing my practicum and, the hours that I would need. And I actually, had a lot of trouble getting those hours since, nothing was in person at that time. And it was really in the middle of my practicum. So that was pretty tough. And then I spent my entire last year doing teletherapy for a college, and that was definitely interesting. I hadn't done teletherapy before, so I was just kind of nervous of, how different is it going to be, versus in person? Are people still going to receive it well? So I had those initial worries, but over time, I definitely got adjusted and got used to it, and I was able to still see the value in teletherapy, and now I love it like more than ever. So I have like so much experience with it. And I think, coming into the field now and also being in a different state, I went to college in North Carolina. So being in a different state now in Texas, of course, things are different. The laws are different. So, it's just been a lot of adjusting and readjusting and just trying to figure out, what people need in this new community that I'm in. But I've enjoyed the journey, and I'm making the best out of it.
Yes. So I'm glad that you said it was tough and challenging, but it's also rewarding, right? Because now
Absolutely.
you are in this space where you are responding to the needs of folks, especially given that a lot of things have not totally switched to in person. So
Hmm.
thank you for sharing that.
Of
So, and I
course.
know you mentioned it was hard during the practicum, especially getting those hours, because some of it had to be in person and things like that. So, how are you and your fellow therapists navigating the demand of more folks wanting to see Black therapists?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, in general, I think a lot of people, even outside of this industry, have moved from corporate spaces, whether that be into a group practice space or that be private practice or whatever the case may be. And I've seen that a lot. And I've seen that, a lot of therapists have wanted like more control over the way that they're able to give offerings to Black women. And unfortunately, I think sometimes that does limit availability, especially when a therapist is just so booked out or very popular. I've heard a lot of, even some of my friends have said like their therapists, are so booked. But I do think that, having the option to have teletherapy has been a complete game changer. Not only just with being able to like offer safety to people, because therapy can be frightening. There's still a stigma around, going to a therapist, and it can just be frightening in general, just having your first session in person. So I think teletherapy has definitely changed the game. And I feel like it's also offered like more availability. I also think collaboration and referrals are huge, especially for those therapists that are booked out, or they may, have a very large caseload. Just being able to refer out to other therapists. So creating the community of other therapists is very, very important so that we can continue to extend the care to Black women. And it's not, just only like, oh, we only have a few people, therapists that can provide services. There are so many Black therapists that are able to provide services. It's just more so of like becoming aware of them, and seeing, their capacity and, what they have to offer. So I think, collaboration and referral is definitely something super huge. And I've seen it a lot more lately, and I'm glad to see it.
Yes, thank you for that. As you were talking, I was thinking about just that community care and what additional supports are needed, right? And so I
Mhm.
like how you all are collaborating and having those referrals to help meet the needs of Black people as we seek, right, therapists that look like us. What are some of those other supports that you think could help, right, in between those times? Because I think some folks are battling with navigating the mental health care system, right? So
Yeah.
you may schedule an appointment today, like I may schedule an appointment with you today, and then you're so booked up, I might not be able to see you until July. Um,
Yeah.
and there's a lot going on. So can you talk about what are those additional supports that folks can look to? And also what are some things that they can look to when they're in crises?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's just the downside of it is that, like I said, there are, specific therapists that are like super booked out. And I think I think that's why referrals are so important, because one therapist may not be able to meet your needs based on their availability, but there are also like so many other therapists that could. So I think, staying open is definitely important. I know that sometimes when we see someone that we like, especially if we're, going through a directory like Therapy for Black Girls, which is an amazing resource, or Psychology Today, or Clinicians of Color, those resources, we see someone and we're like, oh, you know what? I really resonate with this person. And we just like, okay, I really, really want to see this person. And sometimes, due to availability, we're not able to do that. So I think, staying open about who can help is very important, because not just one person can help you, so many people can help you. As far as resources, I would definitely say places like Therapy for Black Girls. They have a podcast, they have a website, they have so many additions to their site that are extremely helpful. And of course you have crisis lines like the suicide hotline and other crisis lines. I know that there's some changes that are going on as far as the numbers or to be happening soon. But those are some resources. And I would also say Instagram. And Instagram is not a replacement for therapy. However, it can be very, very helpful, as far as like different topics, just educating yourself on different things. Sometimes, we just need to hear a specific thing and it kind of triggers an awakening, or it triggers this newfound clarity that we need. And sometimes that newfound clarity can help us get out of that crisis or help us just understand what we're dealing with. Sometimes we don't necessarily feel like, people can relate to what we're going through or we're really seen. So I feel like, when you follow certain pages and, let's say, you might be experiencing a relationship issue and you might follow a therapist that specializes in that, certain posts might be really educational, but they also might be able to provide that additional support that you might need just in developing your own understanding of what you're dealing with, but also just knowing that you're not alone. And I would also say, of course, your support system.
Right. Yes, thank you for that. And that leads me into my next question about social media, right? So, yes, there's so much relatable content that is on social media. We share with our friends from memes to gifts to videos, things like that, right? Because sometimes you have to laugh about whatever you're going through, but then you also see that you're not alone. So, can you talk about how social media plays into your career, right, as a therapist and as a blogger, and how you are growing through these platforms that you
For
use?
sure. I love social media. I think that sometimes, I mean, there are cons, of course. There's cons to everything, but I think what matters about social media is how you use it, right? So I try to use it very intentionally. I am a storyteller, so I love telling stories. So the content that I've created, is really based on that storytelling, and it really has like, I will say, just looking back on content that I've created, the time where I was telling a story, it's not even about the analytics of it. It's more so the response. Those responses have made me feel very connected with people in my community. And they were able to touch someone else. And that is, one of my biggest things that I want to do in this world is just help people and inspire people. So it's really helped me be able to not only tell my story, but to inspire people through my story. And it's just so interesting. I might post a story about, how grad school was really tough for me. And, there might be so many other people in grad school or in undergrad right now that are struggling, and they're like, oh, well, this gave me hope. And I think that's the beautiful thing about social media is that when we tell our story, we give people permission to tell their story. And we also just normalize the fact that we're going through something, and even the good times, right? We normalize that as well. So I think social media in general has just given me a space to be vulnerable. And it's also just given me a space to create a community where they feel comfortable being vulnerable, whether it's with me, whether it's with their friends or whatever. I think that, when you show up as your authentic self, you're also kind of giving people permission to do the same, right? Especially if you're showing up in a way that's not, I won't say that's not accepted, but it's not the norm, right? So I think that, just showing up as myself has really motivated and inspired other people to do the same.
Yes, I love that, especially the piece about storytelling, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is so important, and social media is just that avenue because the more that we talk about the issues that we face, the more other people will feel comfortable and know that they are in a place where they can share their story too. So thank you for that. And also being authentic. That point about being authentic is so important, right? And being able to share your story and your truth. So thank you for that. So, what are some of the common issues that you are seeing amongst those that you work with and engage with in your work?
I would say probably a lot of anxiety, depression, grief, loss, identity issues, relationship issues. And I think a big thing, just in general of the healing process is just unlearning. I think, of course, the pandemic, it gave a lot of us time to sit with ourselves. It gave a lot of us time to really evaluate, are these things helpful in my life? Like, are they actually important? Do they actually make an impact? What actually matters? And so I think, because I think that was really one of the first conversations that we really had about the pandemic, or like the effects of the pandemic. And so, I think a lot of people are just shedding, old versions of themselves. And then, of course, the grief, as many people as we've lost in this pandemic, and, are continuing to lose. And then just the state of the world. There's a lot of stress around that. There's a lot of just daily stress. Things don't feel as easy as they used to feel. The things that we used to do on autopilot, we're questioning, like, wait, what's the purpose of this now? Like, do we actually need to do this? Do we actually want to do this? Like, we're questioning a lot. So I feel like there's definitely been a collective shift, which brings up those issues. And I think the adjustment piece is really huge. So many people have had to adjust their entire lives, and just figuring out, now that this adjustment has happened, what does life look like for me? And or not even what does life look like for me, but how do I want my life to look now?
Right.
Like, how do I intentionally choose, what's important to me, and what I want to participate in and what I don't want to participate in. And I know that boundaries has been a big conversation on social media. Recently, I'd say like over the past like 1 to 2 years, I think, maybe more. But I think boundaries has definitely been, something that a lot of people are struggling with. A lot of people in college or recently graduated, had to move back home or be in different family situations, and just dealing with all these situations. So a lot of issues navigating this new life and new self.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with everything you said about that. And so, what are your thoughts about the conversations that are happening around mental health? And what do you think is missing from those conversations?
Yeah. I could go on and on about that.
Well, we got time, so let us know what's going on, what you think.
But I would say the conversation lacks a lot of nuance, right? A lot of people are just like, oh, it's either this or that, and that's not true.
Right.
Rarely anything in life is black and white. And I think sometimes a lot of people don't like to hear that because it's like, well, this is what I think is right, and this is what I think is wrong, and that's fine, right? It's fine to think that, but it's also important that we create space because everyone has so many different experiences. I mean, the experiences that we know nothing about, and I think it's very important to make space for that. I would say, I feel like in mental health, it's not consistent, right? The conversation isn't consistent. One week it's this, the next week it's that. And I think that we we get really like passionate about these conversations when a crisis happens.
Mm.
And I think that's the issue. It shouldn't take a crisis for us to be passionate about mental health or for us to be having these conversations, right? It shouldn't take something, terrible, or, even just recently in the community, it shouldn't take for someone experiencing a huge mental health crisis to be like, you know what? I think I should be kinder to people.
Mm.
Right. And so I understand that sometimes it can be a wake up call for people, but I feel like the conversation is redundant. It's
Mm.
like, how many times do we have to keep having this conversation about, we should be kinder to people and we should judge people less and we shouldn't, judge people by the way that they look or, their disabilities or whatever the case may be. It's like the conversation comes up and then it's like, it's cool for like 3 days. And then after 3 days, it's like, it's out the window.
Right.
And I think that's just unhelpful, right? And it's like, of course, there are people that continuously having these conversations, but I think as a collective, we need to be consistent about our stance and allow our stance to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's also missing is just like the personal responsibility that we hold. I think in mental health conversations, it's always like, well, you need to do better. And it's like, okay, but I need to do better too. It's not just about what other people need to do, it's also about what I need to do. And I think that if we take more responsibility about our roles in these conversations and in these spaces, then we'll see a lot more change quicker, because that we know that it's not just always about what people are doing, but it's also about what we're doing as well. And I think that, being open to that change and being open to like that criticism almost,
Mm-hmm.
just is going to make a lot more change. And I've seen progress. Like I've definitely seen it, interactions on Twitter, on TikTok, things like that, of just people like, oh, I didn't know that. Thanks for educating me. Or, I'm going to handle this differently next time. But I do think that the more that we can be open and the more that we can be consistent about, how we feel about mental health and continuing to expand the conversation, then we'll see a lot more change.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. What you said is so important because it can get redundant, right? And everyone, hears the same messages, and it's like, so what now? Like,
Right.
what are we gonna do now? Like
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, it did have to take for, COVID to happen, for folks to really see that your mental health is important, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
we know that not everyone has mental illness or condition, but everyone has mental health. Um,
Yes.
and how you navigate that is so important because you have that with you every day as you continue.
Absolutely.
And so I also think that, can you clear up that misconception for because that's the other thing too. And it's the reason why I included mental health and emotional health
Mm-hmm.
with both of these because I don't think people really understand the difference. So could you break that down for folks?
Yeah, and I think what you said, it's funny that you said that because I was literally just thinking about that this morning. I was like, everyone has mental health. Like, and I think, mental health and mental illness can sometimes feel interchangeable to people, which is not great because they're different. But I think, like you said, everyone has mental health, right? It's I mean, we all have, brains, so we have mental health. Emotional health is definitely different because it's it's more so about, how you're taking care of your emotions, and how you're being able to engage with your emotions, being able to be honest about your emotions, and just having that vulnerability. I think is something that is also, something that could be a part of the conversation as well. I think in order to figure out and to improve your emotional health, vulnerability has to happen, right? Because unless we're vulnerable with ourselves and with other people, we don't really know how we feel. And not knowing how you feel can definitely affect your mental health, because there might be some things happening internally that you're not quite sure of. Mentally, you might not necessarily know what that is or how to verbalize that. But I think once you get in touch with your emotional health and that you nurture your emotional health, then you're like, oh, okay, I feel disappointment, or I feel grief, or I feel shocked, or I feel surprised or excited. Then you're able to be like, okay, this is how I feel in my body. This is how I feel emotionally. Then you can, tie that to your emotional health.
Yes, thank you. And the other thing too, people have to understand that there are more emotions than the first 10 that we go to, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's so many more emotions. So,
Yes.
I encourage folks to really explore those emotion wheels that they have
Mm-hmm.
out. I mean, I look at them too, right? Because that it, in the on the outside, it starts with those ones that our go-tos, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sad, mad, angry, those go-tos. But then when you get down to the center, it goes into some other
Those deep.
emotions. Yes, abandoned,
Mm-hmm.
left out, those all those things. And it's like
Mm-hmm.
you have to explore that, right? And I think
Listen, I remember the first time my old therapist brought that up, and she, challenged me to go deeper. And I was like, deeper? What you mean? Like, it was like, no, I'm sad.
right.
And she was like, okay, but what else? What else are you feeling, right? And I think, and as a therapist now, I challenge my clients to do the same. And I think it can feel like we're really digging deep, like we're taking that level off,
Mhm.
and now you got to go deeper, and that can feel really, really vulnerable. And I think that's sometimes why we avoid that, of just being like, well, like, how do I actually feel about this? It's almost like it feels safer to be like, I feel sad, than to be like, I feel abandoned, right? Because then it makes it a lot more real, to say that I feel abandoned.
Yeah, yeah. So I encourage everyone to explore your emotional wellness with that chart. Because
Absolutely.
you definitely get to those layers, and you
Mm-hmm.
realize like those go-tos that you have is like, yeah, let me dig deep. I think that's important, right? So
One thing I will say, like, when I ask people how they are, it's always like good, and I'm like, what is good? What
I'm
does
good
that
with
mean?
that. Yes.
What does that mean to you? Because my good and your good may be completely different, and that's the other thing, right? So, like, my sad and your sad might be different. Like, yes,
Right.
we all know the feelings of sadness, but it might be completely different, or we might view it a different way. My grief and your grief might be different. My happiness and your happiness might be different. So you're right, going in the deeper levels of actually understanding and really pinpointing how we feel, I think it can bring us freedom almost, because it's like we're able to really pinpoint what it is exactly that we're feeling. And I do feel like when we are able to do that, it brings a sense of comfort, because
Mhm.
we really get to pinpoint it, and we're like, wow, this is what I've been feeling this whole time, and there's a word to describe it.
Yes, yes, definitely. And that also goes into the spaces that you need and to be vulnerable, getting to that. So saying you feel unappreciated, saying you feel
Mm-hmm.
unsupported, really gets at the root so that people can actually meet you where you are to help address.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay,
Absolutely.
listen, we are getting to the crux of it today. With y'all today, we
Let's
are
get
getting to
it.
the root. I love it. We are getting to the root. And so I want to shift gears just a little bit to speak specifically about college students and college age students. So specifically individuals that are 18 to 30, you either an undergraduate student, or you're a grad student, or you're in school and working. I want you to talk a little bit about your experience with having to navigate life after graduation. And so I believe you did graduate in the midst of the pandemic. Okay.
So listen, it was not easy in these streets, okay? Uh, it was my journey. I think it was tough. I'm not gonna lie, it was very very tough. Not just like being in the midst of a pandemic, but also just emotionally. There was a lot of personal things that I was going through, which of course affects everything else. Um, so I graduated a year ago, May 9th last year. And I will say, just looking back, of course, that was a few days ago. I had my reflection and I was like, wow, it's a year later and life is very different now. I feel like when you're in school, you almost have a safety zone in a sense. Like you're not officially in the real world. Like you are, but you're not, right? Like, of course, like you might have a job and you're in the real world, but you still have like your main obligation mostly is school. Depending on like if you have kids and things like that. But overall, most people's main priority is school. So you kind of have that safety. And then if you're living on campus, that's also another like safety zone because you're really kind of in like campuses are their own world, right? So it's like you're in that world too. Life before graduation, I think because of the pandemic, I was like so burnt out towards the end. Um, Internship is no joke. Getting 300 hours and figuring out how to do that in 4 months, especially when you're doing teletherapy. And I think it was coming to the end of that time where everyone was just kind of just collectively exhausted. Everyone was like, I don't really want to show up to this stuff. And I know a lot of colleges were struggling with this. And when I was doing my internship at the college, we'd have a lot of conversations about how do we get students involved. And it wasn't that students weren't interested, it was just like they didn't have the capacity to participate because of the pandemic and the way that classes were so stressful. And there were all these assignments despite whatever was going on. And different policies with schools of like, oh, you still have to show up or whatever the case may be. So there was a lot of like stress that was happening with students. And I think that, of course, translated to faculty as well. The college I was working with, a lot of people ended up leaving or they ended up just taking another path because of burnout. Burnout is very much real and it takes a while to recover. When I first moved to Houston, which was about 7 months ago, I was absolutely still recovering from that burnout that I experienced my whole last semester. And I think now life after graduation, I think just learning that full independence, is a really big thing. Learning how to be independent, learning how to take up space, learning how to utilize your freedom and responsibility. Freedom comes at a cost. You have to learn how to be responsible with your freedom because freedom is great. And I remember wanting it so badly when I was in school. I was like, I just want to be done with school. And that is just genuinely how I felt. I was just so over it from the time the pandemic started literally to the end of it. But when you have freedom, although you get to do whatever you want, you have to be responsible for that choice. Whatever that choice may be, you are responsible for that choice and any consequence that may follow. And that's something that was kind of new to me. So developing that independence, responsibility, just navigating life financially and just figuring out what relationships look like, after you graduate. A lot of, of course, people move away or they go back to their home state or, whatever. And of course, since I went to school out of state, I'm originally from Maryland. So I went to school out of state. and it's just like the struggle of like, do I really want to go back there? What's there for me? You know, where do I see myself at? It's like once I graduated, I could pick wherever I wanted to go. Anywhere I want to go, I could go. And that's awesome, but it's a lot of responsibility. But I ended up, you know, choosing Houston. I love it here so far. And I think, you know, like I said, the biggest thing is just figuring out what relationships look like. Because now I'm like almost 2,000 miles away from like my closest friends and family. So now, you know, it's like, okay, well, now you have to make new friends and you have to build a new community and you have to, you know, to figure out what your career is going to look like in this new city. So it's definitely given a lot of exploration for sure. That's what I've been in this process of exploration and just like in recovery mode from everything that graduate school was.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. I think it's so important when you talk about responsibility, right? And what happens after you graduate, right? Because you have this routine, right? And you know, when
Mm-hmm.
you're in school, you kind of find a balance. I won't say you find balance, you find a type of balance, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that all shifts when you are done, right? Because as you
Mm-hmm.
say, you're in full control over your actions and you have to be willing to accept whatever comes with those actions. And I think that's one of the hard things, right? Because you do have to figure out things for yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
for you, like having to navigate being in a new space and, you know, like you said, community and what does that look like for you there? So important. And so for all of the college students right now, you know, those of you that are about to graduate or have graduated, because this is a season of
Grad
graduation.
season. I love
Yes,
grad
you know,
season.
yes. So I can't wait. You'll be seeing all the photos and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, you know, during that time, you definitely just want to consider those things and truly think about whatever your next steps are. So thank you for sharing those tidbits, Key. What are your thoughts about the underutilization of mental health services on campus or in general? Because I know you mentioned, you know, capacity, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I think, you know, there were studies and, you know, research done prior to the pandemic that said that a lot of the services at, you know, universities and colleges just were underutilized. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, you know, do you have any thoughts about that and what you've seen specifically for the college that you work with, you know, around utilization?
Yeah, so I think I even remember when I was at Towson University in Maryland, and you know, as a psych major, you know, of course, I was interested in counseling services, and I actually had a peer educator position at the time, and it wasn't in counseling, but it was through counseling. It was alcohol and drug, um, and it was really interesting to hear those conversations, and as long ago as that was 4 years ago, I think. But it's like that underutilization, I think, has been present probably even before then. But I do think that awareness is a big thing. People don't know what they don't know. And I remember one of the things that we had did at the time, it was like some event, and we were like asking people like, do you know where the counseling center is on campus? Like, have you ever been there? And I think at that time, at Towson, it was the health center and the counseling center in the same building. And a lot of people had no clue, just no clue, right? And we were like, how do we bring that awareness to people that this is the counseling center, and where is it located on campus, is it accessible, like things like that. But I feel like they're, even at North Carolina A&T, I feel like there hasn't been a clear message that was sent out to students other than, hey, we're open. You know
Mm,
what I mean?
yeah,
Like, that's cool and all, but so what? You know, like
yeah,
like it's great to know that there's a counseling center and there's services available, but I think that in order for people to actually engage with those services, they have to see the benefit of it.
right.
And they have to see, what is it actually like. The only reason that I chose not to go to the counseling center at A&T was because I was in a counseling program, right? So I didn't want there to be like a conflict of interest in any shape or form. So I was like, nah, like I don't know about that. So I just ended up going to, see an outside therapist. But even then, I remember, them having conversations about under utilization, but I do think that there's like a stigma around it because people don't know what the experience is like. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, if I'm seen like on campus, what does that mean? Or, you know, am I able to pick, you know, who I want to see? Is there someone that looks like me? Is there someone that represents me and is able to, um, you know, cater to my issues? Another big conversation was, I remember at Towson, students had this like perception of like, oh, I can only have like a certain amount of sessions,
Mm,
because with school like student counseling, dependent on the issues, you may have to refer out. So I think people are kind of nervous about what that might look like. Like, okay, well, I just like open up and I share my entire life with you. And the sixth session, you're like, oh, well, I can't go further. I have to refer you
right.
out. So I think there was like a fear of like, if I open up and I get really comfortable with you, then what happens, right? And how long can we actually engage in this process? So I think the main thing is like the experience, the not knowing what that experience might look like, and then that just being tied to fear, and then that just, of course, just like, okay, well, I'm just not gonna do it because I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, yeah, that's so important because you're right. They'll just say, "Okay, we're here." And I think even in the midst of the pandemic, we hosted a listening session and we were hearing from the students like, "Oh yeah, they sent an email out." And it's like, "Yeah, well,
Exactly.
who's
Yep.
gonna email? Sure, great. Like, but to your point, the experience. What am I going to experience when I come here?
And
You know,
there's
how many
nothing
sessions?
Yeah, and there's nothing that's prompting me to really participate. Like,
Right,
okay, an email, like I get emails every day from Fashion Nova, from Pretty Little Thing. Like, okay, like it's just another email at that point. You know
right.
what I'm saying? So it's like I think there was just not enough call to action, and not enough like really getting in the field almost of like, okay, we're in the trenches with you, and how can we help?
Yeah. Yes, I like that point of the call to action. Yes, like what is the call to action? Me call you? Sure, great. All right. I'll get around to it.
Yeah,
I think that's so important, and I appreciate everything that you shared about that, because I do know there are folks that are experiencing that, right? And they see it, and it's like, yeah, but what is the connection? So I'm hoping that a lot of these colleges and universities hear this,
absolutely.
and make some changes so that way students can actually utilize the services that they need, because they are needed.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Absolutely.
want to shift gears just a little bit for the last few minutes that we have, and just talk about these relationships, child. The
Mm-hmm.
pandemic has impacted relationships so much. And I'm not
Mm-hmm.
even talking about romantic relationships.
Yeah.
I'm talking about friendships. I'm talking about familial relationships. It's just been so much and it's been so hard for folks to
Yeah.
navigate. So let's get on in on
Let's
this.
get into the nitty
Okay.
gritty.
Listen, okay, so we gonna come in hot. Okay, let's talk about these friendship breakups. Okay.
Friendship breakups.
We got coming in
Listen.
hot. Okay. It's like, oh,
Listen.
Key, get into it for us. Get into it for us.
Friendship breakups are really tough. They are hard, if not harder, than romantic breakups for sure. I've experienced many myself, and the grief of losing a friend, I
Same.
mean, it can truly feel so crushing. And then it's like, it's not just that you lost a friend, but you lost your routines with them, you lost your outings with them, you lost any conversations that you might have with them. It's just a collective feeling of loss.
Mhm.
um and I think we're not really taught how to deal with friendship breakups, right? We're always like, okay, this is how you get over a person, this is what you need to do. Delete all the pictures, delete all the texts, go on your healing journey, yada yada yada. But nobody really talks about how to cope with the friendship breakup. And I think, honestly, I feel like sometimes there's some shame around friendship breakups because it's like, and also some internalization around it too. Depending on how the friendship may have ended, it might be like, oh, like I had a friendship breakup and it might be my fault, or what does this mean for me as a person, and what does this mean to me as a friend, right? And how have I played a role in this breakup. And I think there's a lot of shame and just feeling upset about friends. And there's this something there's like romantic relationships are just put on this pedestal, and I just don't get it. Like there, like literally, there's been research like people who have supportive relationships in their life live longer, and that was not about purely about romantic relationships. So there's this pedestal in our society where it's like romantic relationships are all the way up here, then it's like friends. And when really it should be the other way around, because you're not always going to be in a romantic relationship. There are people that actively choose to not be in a relationship. There are people that, you know, of course, have time periods of life where they want to be single. And, you know, friendships are the thing that are constant in your life. And I do think that we should put more emphasis on it. And I think that if we kind of change the way that we look at friendships, then it'll change the way that we view friendship breakups and how we should actually grieve them, instead of tossing them to the side like they don't really matter.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's so important. And that's one of the hot topics that I've just been seeing in conversations, especially on social media and just with other people about that, right? Because there is a sense of grief and loss. There is this idea that you shouldn't cultivate your relationships with your friends and the sister circle thing. But you know, it's so hard, right? Because I want to jump in because just check on your strong friend. You know, I feel like that gets thrown out there, right? I'm a strong friend, right? I'm that strong friend, right? I don't share everything, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But I think that in relationships, friendships per se, when they say check on your strong friends and things like that, it's like, well, how do you navigate that, right? How, if you are a strong friend, what do you need to do if you're that person that continuously reaches out and you don't feel like the person is responding, you feel like they are ghosting you? Like, can you talk a little bit about that too?
Listen, I got a lot to say on this topic because, you know, it's like you said, it's been a hot topic and I've been thinking about it a lot lately. So, you know, my opinion may be unpopular and I'm cool with that. I think I think the check on your strong friends is very much outdated. I think that people, I get the intention, I really do, but I don't think that it's being used correctly. A lot of people use it to guilt people into trying to be a better friend. That is not the way. Guilt is not the way to encourage people to be better friends. I also think that it lacks a lot of nuance. You can check on people all day, but what does the safety of your relationship look like? In order for people to open up and to be vulnerable with you, there has to be safety present. If you can literally think about any time, any of your relationships that you feel comfortable sharing, you feel comfortable being vulnerable, that person more than likely makes you feel safe, or the relationship is safe for you to do that, right? So it's not just about checking up, because you could check on someone and you don't have that type of relationship with them, and of course they won't open up, because why would they? There's no really I won't say incentive, but there's no really reason to, because you don't have that safety there and available, right? And I think, you know, the safety is very, very, very important. But in the same breath, just because there's safety in the relationship doesn't mean that people are automatically going to share.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it is our responsibility to be honest with where we're at in life. And people can't help what they don't know about. So while it is extremely hard sometimes to open up about what you're going through, it is 100% necessary. Because if you tell me that you're okay, I'm going to believe you. Because why wouldn't I? You're a friend. I trust you. I trust that you're saying, you know, honest statements. And if you tell me that you're okay, I'm going to believe you. And I know that me personally, like just thinking back on my past, I used to do this thing where I would say that I wasn't okay, or that I was okay, because I wanted people to continue to pry and continue to explore. Are you sure? Are you sure you're okay? Like, you don't seem okay. Like, I wanted people to say that I wasn't okay because I couldn't say it myself. And I think a lot of us do that, right? And it's not helpful to our overall healing, because we're not we're not showing up in a way where we're able to receive help and help to be available to us. I can extend all the help that I want, but it's also about us receiving it, because extending help is great, but someone has to be in the space to receive that as well, and you are the only person that can change how you receive things, right? So I think sometimes there's not enough accountability and personal responsibility in this conversation. And it's not to say that what people deal with isn't hard to navigate. It's to say that there it can be both, right? There's duality. It
Yep.
can be both. You can be going through something, a really tough time, and you also still have a personal responsibility to yourself to say that. You have a responsibility to yourself to say, hey, you know what? I'm not okay. And in this conversation, a lot of people that I've seen, especially on social media, they have this, saying of like, well, me talking about it isn't going to change what happened, or me talking about it isn't going to make me feel better. And maybe they're right. Talking about it won't change what happened. But you know what it will do? It will help people share the burden with you. It will help people be able to extend support, right? So you won't sit in your pain alone. You will have somebody sitting with you. And that is 10 times better than you carrying the burden by yourself. But this idea that nothing might change is um definitely a thing that I think that we should unlearn as a collective, because it's not necessarily about changing the past, right? It's about, okay, the past has happened, now what can we do to support you while you process this, while you deal with this tough time, and how can we move forward? So it's not necessarily about changing what has happened, it's more so about developing an acceptance of what has happened and supporting you through that process. And I think, just thinking back in my life, it has never really been about things being different. Just knowing that people were in the trenches with me. Being in the trenches with somebody is always going to help them navigate the experience better versus them doing it alone. We are not meant to live this life alone. We are not meant to handle healing alone. So I think, collectively, we need to change how we respond to people being vulnerable. A lot of people still have a lot of judgment, especially on social media, when people are being vulnerable. And I think that if we can collectively change how we respond to people when they're vulnerable, then we'll be able to normalize vulnerability. And vulnerability is the key to community. I truly believe that. I believe that all of our experiences are important. And I believe that the more experiences that we share, the more we find folks in our community and the more that we can heal collectively.
Oh my gosh, Key, you touched on so much, and it's so important, everything that you stated. I wish we had more time to
I
really delve deep
know.
into this. I encourage everyone in the audience to continue the conversation on social
Absolutely.
media, continue the conversations with your friends, because there's so much to this that we would love to explore more about. I mean, we didn't even get into how, sometimes you don't even talk people about stuff, child.
Mhm.
We didn't get into what else we didn't get into. We didn't get into high functioning depression, child.
Listen, we didn't get into a lot of this stuff that is really affecting us. The anxiety,
Yeah.
the people pleasing, the codependency,
Oh,
all of
oh my
it.
gosh. Yes, we don't even talk about codependency can happen in friendships. It doesn't have to be romantic
Mhm.
relationships. Okay, Key, I don't know. I think the verdict is out. We may need a part two.
We
So
might need a part two. Comment
we
in the, comment if we need a part two because I'm
comment. Let
down
us
for
know if
it.
we need a part two. Yes. Please let us know if we need a part two, because I mean we can go on and on about this. So Key, thank you once again for all that you've shared today. Look out for part two, because we got to
Yes.
finish this. This was so great. So thank you for
Thank
all the
you
insight
so
that you
much.
shared today.
Yes, thank
Um,
you for having me, and thank you for everyone
yes,
that tuned in.
yes.
Please support this organization. They're doing amazing, amazing things. And I'm really looking forward to this part too. We gotta do
Yes, we got it. It's already on the books. We got it. So thank
it.
you again, Key, and thank you to everyone that tuned in. We will have our yoga demonstration today at 1 p.m. Eastern following this. Tomorrow is our last MSK event at 6 p.m. Eastern time, titled Exploring Sexual Pleasure. Okay, so we ended with some pleasure.
Period.
Okay,
conversation that needs to happen very much.
okay. So part two for that conversation as well. So stay tuned. Don't forget to RSVP at the link below so that way you can receive your MSK self-care box. And thank you again to everyone and take care.
Thank you guys. Bye.